Welcome to LearnCreateSew. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to add a zipper pocket. This technique is usually used in bags and purses. I'm going to set my zipper aside for a moment, and I'm going to begin by creating the zipper window. The pocket that I'm making today is going to be used in a purse, and I have my lining fabric, which is the striped fabric here, and I have my pocket fabric, which is the purple dot fabric. The first thing I'm going to do is take my pocket fabric and place it right side down on top of the lining. So they should have the right sides touching. I'm going to place my pocket fabric 2 inches from the top edge. This can vary depending on where you'd like your pocket to be placed. In total, I would like the opening for my zipper to be 3 inches from the top of my lining. This means I'm going to mark the placement for my zipper window 1 inch below the edge of my pocket fabric. I do like to have at least 1 inch of pocket fabric extend beyond my zipper window. This will be helpful later. You can make this section wider if you would like it to be easier to work with, but I find at least 1 inch is helpful. Similarly, when you create your zipper window, it's nice to have at least 1 inch of extra fabric on each side. So since my pocket fabric here is 9 inches wide, I'm going to be creating a zipper window that is 7 inches wide. To create my zipper window, I'm going to start by drawing a line 1 inch from the top edge of the pocket fabric that starts and stops 1 inch from each edge. Then I'm going to slide my ruler down, and I'm going to make another line the exact same width, but this time my line is going to be 3/8 of an inch below my first one. I'm using a wet erase marker to do this. You want to make sure you use something that's not going to be visible on your final project. So if you don't have a fabric marking tool, even a regular pencil will work. And then connect the ends of those 2 lines to create a box. I'll go over this with a heat erase pen just so you can see. So I now have a rectangle that is 1 inch from the top edge of the pocket fabric and 1 inch from each side of the pocket fabric. This created a window that is 7 inches long. You can change the dimensions of this window to be however long or short you'd like. Now I'm going to use a few pins to hold this in place. You want to make sure that your pins are not in the path of your seam allowance. We're going to be stitching on this rectangle, and we don't want to have to move the pins as we sew. I find that most of the time with regular cotton fabric, a lot of pins aren't necessary, but if you're using a different type of fabric, something that is slick, you may need more pins. Okay, now I'm going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch exactly on this rectangle. Now we want this to be as exact as possible. To do this, I'm going to reduce my stitch length to 2.0. I find that with a smaller stitch length, I'm able to be much more exact. Also, when I sew the short ends of the rectangle here and here, I'm going to count the number of stitches that I use. That way when I turn around and go to the other side, I can have the exact number of stitches to make sure that my rectangle is evenly spaced. Also, you want to be super precise when doing the corners. You want to make sure you put your needle down and lift the foot up so you can pivot really well. You don't want to go beyond the edge of your rectangle, and you don't want to do any back stitches to make corrections, because this process works a lot better when your rectangle is exact. So let's head to the sewing machine and use stitch length 2.0 to sew a box exactly on this line. Instead of starting on a corner, I find it's easier for me to start somewhere in the center of the line, and I just have more success that way. I would also recommend using coordinating thread. My thread contrasts just a little, so you can see it on camera, but coordinating thread is best. So just take your time, go slow, and be as exact as possible. I've sewn my rectangle perfectly on my line. If you have any imperfections in your rectangle, now is the time to fix it. If you need to unpick or resew, take the time to do that, because it will make the next steps easier and it will make your zipper window look better. Next, we're going to cut a slit in the center of the box. You do want to be as close to center as possible. I'm just marking it with pencil here. And as you get to the end, about 1 centimeter away from the end, angle off your cuts to point to the corners, exactly to the corners. And you'll do the same for both ends. So I'm going to cut right on my pencil marks in the center with 2 angled lines going to each corner. I'm going to be very careful to make sure that I clip as close to those corners as I can without clipping my stitches. I find it's easy to begin cutting by folding your fabric and just doing a little snip in the middle. And now I can cut along the line. Again, you want to get very close without cutting your stitches. Repeat for the other side. Next, let's head to the ironing board. I had seen this process to create a window for a zipper a lot of different ways, but what really helped me to be successful was pressing. In the past, whenever I made a zipper window, I'd find that I could always see a little bit of my pocket fabric on the front side of my project, and I really didn't want to, and it drove me crazy. So pressing really well in this step is what helped my zipper pockets to turn out much nicer. So if you're struggling to get this rectangle opening to look really nice, take the time to press. Similarly, if you're new to making zipper pockets, one thing that can be really helpful is to make the pocket fabric the exact same color as your lining or whatever your main fabric is. And that way, if you do happen to see a little peek of it, it's not a big deal. So I'm going to start by pressing along each edge. So I'm going to take the top edge of my pocket fabric and I'm going to pull it down along that stitching at the top of the rectangle, and I'm going to press. And I'm going to lift it back up, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. I'm going to grab the pocket fabric from the bottom, and I'm going to pull it up snug right along the edge of stitching on the bottom of that rectangle, and I'm going to press. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the right. Pull that pocket fabric over till it's nice and snug next to the rectangle stitching, and press. And then do the same on the left. I know it seems like a lot of pressing, but it really does help. Now we have this opening here that we cut with our scissors. So take the pocket fabric and place it through the opening. And it's kind of messy right now, But there's our opening for our zipper. So turn it to the back side and pull that fabric flat. If you find your fabric is not turning well, if it's really bunchy in the corners, or you have a lot of wrinkles, you may need to clip a little closer to the corner, or you may need to press a little better before pulling your fabric through. And let's head back to the ironing board. Gently fold your pocket fabric up along your stitch line and press. This is a Tailors Clapper. I'm just going to use it to help keep that heat in there and press that seam a little better. And then I'm going to do the same on the bottom, left and right. Keep an eye on the shape of your rectangle. You don't want it to get too big, so make sure you're folding exactly at that stitch line. If you see a little peek of the front fabric, that's usually good, but not too much. Since I have interfacing on the back of my lining, it's taking a little bit more pressing than if it was just the cotton, but I want to make sure that it's turned good and strong. And now I'm going to turn it over and press again from the front. And now I have a nice window for my zipper. Next, lay your zipper right side up. Since my zipper is a little longer than I need, I've opened the zipper up a little bit so that I don't see these metal tabs, but you could definitely keep those at the end if you prefer. So I'm simply going to lay my fabric over top of my zipper and center it. You can pin the zipper in place, use double-sided wash-away fabric tape, or fabric glue to hold it in place. I usually just hold it, but a couple of pins aren't a bad idea. And that's probably all I need. Now I'm going to stitch around the entire rectangle with a 1/16 of an inch seam allowance. You can also use an 1/8 of an inch if you prefer. Just make sure it doesn't get too big. You do want to make sure that you're stitching on both the zipper tape and the fabric. I'm going to increase my stitch length to 2.5 for this step, and I also have my zipper foot attached to my sewing machine. Depending on your machine, you may or may not need your zipper foot for this step. Check to make sure your zipper opens freely and that there aren't any errors. Fix any mistakes that you need to, and then go ahead and press. Take care not to melt your zipper, so you may want to test your iron first, and you may need to reduce your heat. So right now my zipper opens and closes wonderfully, but you can see it's going into nothing. I don't really have a pocket there, so let's construct the pocket. Take your zippered panel and turn it right side down. You can see that we're now looking at the pocket fabric. I'm going to trim off my zipper tape. You only want to do this after your rectangle has been completed. And I'm just going to trim off the ends here. Careful not to cut your metal stoppers. Now I'm going to take the bottom edge of the pocket fabric and fold it up to reach the top edge. And I'm going to pin around the 3 sides. And now I need to sew this in place. When I sew my pocket fabric, I don't want to stitch it to the lining. I don't want to see these stitches on my final project, so what I'm going to do when I head to the sewing machine is I'm going to lay my fabric flat like this, and I'm going to move my lining fabric out of the way so that when I sew, I'm only sewing on the pocket. So I'm going to start from the bottom like this. I'm going to move this fabric out of the way, and I'm going to sew along the side, and then I'll pivot. I'll move this fabric out of the way, sew along the top edge and pivot, and then I'll move this fabric out of the way and sew along this side and pivot. I'm going to sew around the edge of the pocket with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but you could definitely use a different seam allowance if you prefer. I would not go any smaller than a 1/4 of an inch, but 3/8 or 1/2 of an inch would be just fine. You can see that the pocket has now been sewn on both sides as well as the top. It wasn't necessary to sew on the bottom since that was a fold. And now when we turn it right side out, we have a nice pocket. I hope this tutorial was helpful to you. We hope to see you again later at Learn, Create, Sew. Until next time, happy sewing!